Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
I want to thank you for taking a moment to click the like button, to click the subscribe button, to click the bell icon, because what else are you going to do while you're sitting through this? I mean, just do it. I mean, it gives you something to do while you're listening to us. So thanks.
Thanks, Todd. For those who are new to this channel, each week, Todd, Leonard, and I take a moment to talk about the upcoming weekend's lectionary readings from the Gospels. And our goal is to talk about those readings in the context of love and inclusion and social justice. And our hope is that our talking will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something we'll say during this time would inspire you along with us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, we were talking about last week and how low energy we were and how you were lacking
Yes,
sleep, and I was starting to get kind of a cold or get sick, or I had
yes,
been sick. I thought it
yes.
was just a sinus infection, but I went the next morning and got tested, and I had COVID.
That's fantastic. So
And I
you had a legitimate excuse. You were not acting, you were not faking, you were not being a drama you were not dramatizing, over dramatizing your situation. You were really sick.
I was really sick last week, and I'm still not 100% back this week. My energy levels are super low, and I'm starving for well, I mean, not like physically because I have no taste or smell, but I am starving for social interaction because I've been in quarantine for 5 days.
Wow.
I've been in
And here
isolation,
I am.
solitary isolation. So this is it, dude. You're it. You're my socialization today.
I am so sorry because I have no energy either because I didn't sleep. I slept better than the last time we met, but I'm still tired. So, but
Still not sleeping well.
I, I cannot complain because I'm not sick. It's just I've got sleep issues. So anyway, we're gonna do better. We're gonna come through with more energy than last week, and
I'm
we're
gonna
just
try.
we're back on the upward climb. We're moving. We're marching to Zion. Beautiful, beautiful Zion. Uh,
What passage are we looking at this week, Todd?
We are looking at Mark chapter 9, verses 38 through 50.
So when I was looking at this week in preparation for tonight, our discussion, I love this story right in the beginning where the disciples are like, we saw someone doing what we're doing in your name, but he's not part of us, so we told him to stop it. And Jesus says, don't do that. Don't stop him. Jesus isn't threatened by him. He doesn't look at it as competition. He doesn't look at it as a rival. He says, don't do that. Anyone who's not against me is for me. And I love that Jesus kind of has this big tent idea.
Yeah,
Sometimes we get the idea that everybody has to be like us, walk like us, think like us, look like us. But justice work, making the world a safer, more just, more compassionate home for everybody, is a richly diverse work.
yep.
And I don't think that justice is threatened by diversity. It's not uncomfortable with it. What
No,
do you
I don't
think? What do
think
you think?
so. I don't think so. And the only thing that I think you can draw an exact parallel to what you just said with this passage. I think for somebody who is still hung up on it's all got to be about Jesus
Mm-mm.
because this guy that the disciples have a problem with is using the name
Oh,
of
excuse
Jesus,
me.
people will say, well, at least he was using the name of Jesus. That's the key is he's using the name of Jesus. And
Yeah.
what I know you're saying and what I know my own experience to be is I've worked very close with Jewish people who don't believe in Jesus as their Lord and Savior, who are doing what I would describe as the works of Jesus, uh, but they don't need Jesus to be their inspiration. They don't need Jesus to be their Lord and Savior to do the very things that you and I believe Jesus are calling us to do. That in fact, it seems like they are able to get the same call from the Hebrew prophets that you and I are drawing from the person of Jesus.
Because they
For
were
some
standing in the
reason,
same tradition.
they're standing in the same tradition. For some reason, people who don't even have the Hebrew prophet tradition, who are Buddhist, or people who don't even have a religious faith tradition at all, who are atheist or agnostic, somehow get to the same idea that justice matters and that equity for all matters, and they're able to do work that looks very similar to what Jesus was talking about and doing in his time without ever mentioning Jesus, without ever cracking a Bible, they're able to do the same work. And so it seems like to me that if Jesus was here, he would say, I don't need them to bring my name up as long as, because for me, and we do have this passage from Jesus that's brought up at least, I think, in a couple of the Gospels where Jesus says, I'm really about, where there's a parable of the one who says they're going to do it and the parable where the one who says they're going to do it and then doesn't do it, and then the one who says they're not going to do it but ends up doing it. Jesus says, I'm all about the one who ends up actually doing
Forget the
it.
profession. Yeah.
Forget saying the right words. It's the people who actually do it that matter. I have a feeling that this story about this guy who's not a part of the disciples and actually with Jesus, using Jesus' name, I think it's the same principle at work here.
What you're saying reminds me of a book by James Robinson called The Historical Search for the Gospel of Jesus. And he makes a compelling case that today Christianity teaches a gospel about Jesus. Jesus never taught a gospel about Jesus. It's not the same thing. What Jesus taught, it was different than what we teach about Jesus today. Two different subjects. And so he draws this great distinction between a gospel about Jesus and the gospel of Jesus that Jesus actually taught himself. And when you go and look at what Jesus actually taught, what was his gospel, what he was about, you can totally see Jesus being way more concerned about centering those values and those ethics and that way of living justly in the world and doing no harm and embracing
Right.
the outcast and all of that. The golden rule. Jesus cares way more. I would think that Jesus would care way more about someone who was about those things, not even if they didn't embrace the Christian gospel that we have today about Jesus. They still could
Right.
be embracing the gospel of Jesus. You know what I'm saying? The same things, same ethics, same teachings, and have want nothing to do with the gospel about Jesus. Another thing that what you said just made me think of, and I'm thinking about secular humanist. This week, I saw a short little snippet from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who was talking about the all the number of the people who have ever existed on planet Earth, and then he contrasts that with all of the people that the number of all the people that statistically could have existed on Earth, and how it's such a larger number compared to those that actually do exist. That in secular humanism, we're so caught up about having to die. Like all of this, that's the human dilemma. We all cope with death somehow. Most of us in very unhealthy ways, but we all cope with death somehow. And he says, we're the ones that got to live. We're out of all the people that could live,
Yeah.
you're one of the ones that got to. And so you get to die only because you got to live. Some of these people never even got to live. And when you look at it that way, what you're describing, Todd, is that not only if we're some of the few who got to live, then how we live matters. How we live, how we treat people matters. If they're one of the precious ones who got the chance to live, move, and have being, then how we relate to them, regardless of our differences, that matters. And so you could even be a secular humanist and embrace that
Yeah.
gospel, which is the gospel of the golden rule, and say,
Yeah.
and be part of this. Be part of this big tent.
Right. I mean, I don't think anybody would spend any time listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson and say, "Wow, because you're a secular humanist," and whatever you do or don't believe about, and I don't. It doesn't. It seems like he does not believe,
He doesn't
from
subscribe
what
to
we can
religion.
tell. He doesn't subscribe to religion. It does not appear. No one would say, "Wow, well, because he doesn't have religion, well, look at him. He's such a bad dude.
Right.
He's so self-centered. He's so unconcerned with the world and how it works. He's so unconcerned with his fellow human beings.
No,
It's
he looks at the world with
because he
such
doesn't have
awe.
he doesn't have a morality. He doesn't have a human ethic. Because he doesn't have faith in God. No, he's actually really concerned. He's actually quite concerned about the environmental situation. Because he's concerned about human longevity.
I would love to have Neil as my neighbor.
Yeah.
I would not be threatened by that at all. You know what I mean?
Wow.
He seems like a good human.
Seems like he would be a pretty good guy to be around. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Now, I would not, and I'm not trying to like throw anybody under the bus, but I can think of a lot of people in my religious background that I would not want as my neighbor. And I'm not saying that all secular humanist atheists are nice people. I've met.
no.
You know what I'm saying? But I'm just
It's
saying.
the human condition. It's the human thing.
Right. But what I'm saying is, it's not the profession, like what you just said. It's not the profession that matters.
Right.
It's what kind of a human being are you? And Jesus
Right.
saw someone here doing good work and said, "Don't stop him just because he doesn't look like us."
Right. Exactly. I think this segues well into the next part about.
That's all I've got this week, Todd.
Oh,
I'm done.
I have some more.
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
Because
It
I read your
segues, sorry,
blog.
go ahead.
Because
It
I read your blog, so I have
Oh.
more. So there's, I mean, I know you're recovering from COVID. If you're out of breath and that's all you can handle, I mean, that's all you got, man. We'll understand.
No, go ahead. Well, it segues. It segues. How does it segue?
Segue. I think it talks about that. Therefore, we're talking about
yeah.
then how do we care for the vulnerable, and what does that look like? And
I love the way the author of the Gospel of Mark ties that discussion in with this next discussion. In context, this is the next subject then. If anyone mistreats, since we're talking about what my kingdom looks like, if anybody mistreats one of these little ones, the most vulnerable among us, it's better for them for a large millstone to be hung around their neck. Like, and it's what we talked about last week about leadership. It's about taking care. The world is going to thrive when we create a world where we take responsibility for making sure, even especially the most vulnerable among us to abuse and exploitation, are ensured that they have what they need to thrive and they're cared about and taken care of. That's when the world's going to thrive. I mean, that's kind of like the canary in the coal mine, is how are the most vulnerable being treated?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think we marvel, of course, when we see our fellow human beings do it. We also marvel at the more intelligent species, and even maybe sometimes the less intelligent species, how they will rally around the weak and the infirmed among them, and to protect and to care for. It's actually, it's like there's something deeply embedded in the creative DNA that says the best version of our species fights for the vulnerable. When you're leaning into the best of yourselves, this is what we do. This is how
Mm.
we live. This is what we fight for. And so when Jesus says this, he's pointing back to that person who's using Jesus' names to cast out demons and set people free from what they perceived as that possession, and saying, no, he's this guy is doing exactly that thing. He's going after people who are in vulnerable situations and he's setting them free. This is exactly what we should be doing. And God forbid anyone would run from that challenge. God forbid that anyone would look at somebody in that situation and not care. This is actually exactly what I'm calling you to do. This is exactly what we're supposed to be, and be aware if you're not going to do that, what could happen.
Yeah, I'm thinking right now, Todd, and you brought up one of these communities last week, and I couldn't help it stuck with me. I couldn't help but think about it too. As I was reading this week's passage, one of the communities that has been vulnerable, and I can think of a couple as I'm saying this out loud.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the communities that has been vulnerable to abuse during this most recent election cycle is the immigrant community. I'm also thinking of the
Mm-hmm.
trans community and other
Mm-hmm.
and women specifically in their
Yes.
rights. But immediately within at least the last 3 or 4 weeks, right?
Yes.
The immigrant communities, especially those in Springfield, Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
and you brought them up last week. But as I thought about this, these who are at the moment most vulnerable. And what makes them most vulnerable, I want to be very clear, is not some fault or weakness in themselves. It's
It's not some
whichever,
DNA genetic situation. It's not some cultural
no,
thing like that.
it's whatever differences the majority deems as non-normative.
Mm-hmm.
That's who we pick on, those that are
Mm-hmm.
different from us. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, we're all different from one another. I know that. But we have when we have
It's
things
the
in common,
resourced in power majority
right?
has the ability to cause estrangement, cause marginalization, cause deportation.
Yeah.
Um,
Certain differences make some people who have those differences more vulnerable to abuse than
yes,
those that don't have those differences.
yes,
And in those moments, we're called to care for those who are vulnerable.
yes.
That's what's being said this week.
I watched a pastor say this week, Christians are supposed to be nice to any immigrant they meet, but they are to vote to keep them out of their country.
And that sounds like Sodom and Gomorrah, Todd. Isn't that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah of that story? Is that they
It,
created this violence to keep people who didn't live there from showing up and visiting because their territory was so plentiful. And Christians have made that story about homosexuality, which it has nothing to do with
it's not.
homosexuality. Nothing. What it has to do with how do you treat the migrant? How do you
That's right.
treat the nomad? How do you treat the visitor? How do you treat,
And
it's a lesson in hospitality.
they literally run them out of town in
They
the most
ran them out of
abhorrent
town
way possible.
because they were the most affluent region in that area. They didn't
Correct.
want other people coming and sharing resources.
Tainting
Yes.
it.
Yes.
Yes.
So we're
And
Sodom and Gomorrah, dude. Not because of the way Christians do. Christians have said we are.
right, no.
We're
Right.
Sodom and Gomorrah because of the way we treat our immigrant population.
That's right. That's right. We literally, and again, as I said last week, and the town of Springfield, other than because then that they have not been able to keep up with the schools and the infrastructure because the influx happened relatively quickly, but the state will catch up to it like states and countries catch up to influxes of people all the time. That city has been revitalized by the immigrants coming in. Those immigrants have been a blessing in so many ways to that community.
That's right.
And the local community by and large understands that, and this is and so when you man, I'm so this gets me so emotional. I'm because I got Haitian friends. And it's just like it just drives me nuts. I it this is it is I appreciate you saying Sodom and Gomorrah. It needs to be cast in such reprehensible imagery
It is
because
reprehensible.
because it's reprehensible. It is looking at gifts of God and 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 shitting on them,
Yeah.
and that is reprehensible.
And I think that's it. And again, COVID brain, but I think it's Ezekiel 16 that redefines what the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah are. You were overfed
Mm-hmm.
and you weren't concerned about the poor and the stranger.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's anyway, yeah. Yeah, so take care of the vulnerable. And the next thing he says, and there's some good here and then there's some bad. I want to start with the good. We'll start wherever you want to, Todd. But he says it's better for you to enter life. Oh, if your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life maimed than with two hands to go into Gehenna. And I say Gehenna because, and he lists other things here in a minute or two, as far as plucking out an eye and feet and those types of things. And he talks about the worm that doesn't die and the fire that's not quenched. The reason I use the word Gehenna rather than hell is that hell is a Christian creation. That in the Jewish worldview, Gehenna was not an afterlife location. It had a rich tradition in the Hebrew prophets that Jesus, and again, Jesus is standing in that tradition. He's just
Mm-hmm.
using he's using Gehenna in the same way it had been used in the Hebrew prophets before him. Gehenna was synonymous, and I put verses in this week's blog. If anybody wants just a couple, Isaiah 34, 9 through 10, Jeremiah 17, 27, Isaiah 30, 31 through 33, and Isaiah 66, 22 through 24. This is where that language is being taken from. And in none of these cases are the Hebrew prophets ever talking about the afterlife or some postmortem hell the way that
Right.
Christians do. They're always talking about an unsustainable system of injustice and exploitation, oppression,
Mm-hmm.
and violence towards the vulnerable in their societies. That's why it's here in this context, against the
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable in their societies, and how and what's going to happen when that system that is unsustainable, that injustice that is unsustainable, what's going to happen when that runs out? The devastation and destruction that's going to come. For
Mm-hmm.
them, for Israel, it was being subjugated by a Gentile power or
Mm-hmm.
empire for the way they
Mm-hmm.
treated the vulnerable within their own communities or exploited the vulnerable within their own communities. But for us today, it wouldn't be the same application. Gehenna for us today would be what happens when our economic system of exploitation and extraction, it's not sustainable. What happens when
Right.
that runs
When it
out?
collapses. Yeah.
Yeah. What happens when, we run out of fossil fuels? What happens when
Right.
we've so damaged the planet beyond repair that it'll no longer sustain human life?
When we run out of places to stow our trash, where our
Yeah.
trash we export our trash to other
Or we run
places who
out
will
of
take our trash.
indigenous populations from which to
Yes,
extract resources.
correct.
I'm
Yep.
all for replacing fossil fuels. I don't want to be misunderstood by this. But one of the books that we recommended last year um, at Renewed Heart Ministries, one of our monthly reading books, was a book that called into question even the green program today towards
Yeah.
electric vehicles and those types of things. And I'm not against electric vehicles by any means.
But the way that we're going about supplying the
We're
materials
still
for it, we're
extracting the
still exploiting
materials
people.
from indigenous populations. We haven't
Yes.
learned any lessons. We've
No.
just changed what the resource is that we're now going to exploit people of.
If we're gonna ask people to mine the materials, we should be creating incredibly safe mining practices. Should be paying people a a wage commensurate with the work they're doing. They're taking care of their families, providing health care. But no, what we're doing is because those people are used to getting paid hardly nothing and used to working in very dangerous and will take anything they can get. Uh, we're letting them uh, work and put their lives on the line every day and be treated horribly for almost no money. Um, and yeah, so
I remember reading a
it's
study last year written by a First American. He's a Christian pastor, but he's a First American. And he was writing about how First American communities don't engage the debate between capitalism and socialism. He said,
yeah,
so you give the profits to the laborers rather than to the capitalists? That's fine. But it doesn't change the fact that you exploited the indigenous populations in
yeah.
order to create those profits. You're just arguing over where those profits go.
The
Those are
first world,
deeper discussions.
the first world, whether it's socialist or Democrat or dictator, we're all exploiting the
As
third
long as
world.
we're exploiting people for the way we live in order to achieve the way we live.
Yeah,
It would be better for a
and
millstone hung around our head. That's what he's saying when he says that we're, that the he's warning of what's going to, and for his immediate context, when their exploitative system ran out was when the poor people had enough
yeah,
and they revolted right there,
yeah,
before 66
yeah. It wasn't
CE.
that just a couple
And that
decades later.
and that led right into the Jewish Roman War of 66 to 69, which led into the razing of Jerusalem by
Yeah,
Rome in 70. Talk about Gehenna.
yeah.
That was a
That
Gehenna,
was
and it had
Gehenna.
nothing to do with what Christians call hell. It was all
Yeah,
in this life.
we are. Man, bro, we've gotten. I feel the weight of this stuff, man. I'm just feeling.
There's
I'm
just a
feeling.
lot in this week's passage.
Man.
There's a lot. And lastly, I have to give one more critique. Let me throw this out there because I
Oh
know
yeah,
our
there's
time's
that
slipping
too.
away. There's two more things. I'm looking at it. There's two more things, but so not lastly, second to lastly.
You sound like a preacher. Go ahead.
I don't like the ableist language here,
Right.
where Jesus has whole bodied and Gehenna on two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And in the middle are people that don't have a whole body, but at least they're not in Gehenna.
Yeah.
It's a gradation of value
Yeah.
that's not as good as, but better than. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And I don't think we need to devalue
No.
people's very real lived experience with disabilities and missing
No.
limbs or missing appendages or missing parts. We don't need to disparage that as less than in order
No.
to warn people of the unsustainability of a system that exploits the vulnerable. It's
Yeah.
kind of self-defeat. It's kind of contradictory.
Right.
So I
Right.
get though the time and place in which this was written, but today when we tell the Jesus story, we need to relate. We need to take better
Yes.
care
Yes.
of our special needs communities in telling the
Yes.
Jesus story.
Yes.
So I want
I
to
have
say
nothing
that.
to add to that. I have nothing to add to that. You're spot on with that. right there
All right,
with
well,
you.
let me throw this out there then. How does salt lose its saltiness? Because that's where it ends this week. It says when salt
Well,
loses its saltiness, it's just not good for anything.
again, you, sir, are the scholar, and I am simply comic relief. Please tell us.
No, no, no. You're more than comic relief, Todd, but you are really good at comic relief. No, so
Thank
they
you
would
very
take
much.
these white rocks, right? And they would throw them in a bag and they would stir their food with them while it was cooking. And as it was cooking, the salt would dissolve. We've all used salt while we're cooking, and it doesn't stay in little granules that we, shook it on.
Right. It
It
dissolves.
it dissolves and permeates into the food.
Yep.
So they weren't chemists back then. They couldn't tell what was salt and what wasn't. They just, mined a whole bunch of white rocks and threw them into a bag. It was called the salt bag. And after a while, the salt bag, all the salt would have dissolved, and all that was left in there was the white gravel that looked like salt, but they couldn't tell the difference. But it wasn't salt, so it lost its saltiness. It was good for nothing but to be thrown out like gravel and trodden under the feet of men, to quote the King James Version, and they'd have to go get more salt. So we know today that salt can't lose its saltiness chemically, but for them, they didn't know any of that. They just knew that after a while, the salt bag stopped salting food, and they needed to get a new one.
Those ignorant end of BC people. Ignorant fools.
No, I'm not saying that. But
But it's a time and place. Again, it's no. This is what we're saying. I mean, we have to time and place. So time and place. Say some ableist stuff. You have the mystery of how
some
salt
wrong
loses its
chemistry.
saltiness.
Right,
And you don't really understand. It's magic.
right.
So yeah, no, that's all there. And
And
people will look back. People will look back at us in 100 years, Herb, and
That's
will
true.
laugh at us.
That's true. I
They'll
look
laugh
forward
at
to it.
us. It'll be great.
100 years from now, you and I got
You
to make
won't
some
you
popcorn.
won't you won't be around to see it.
It's true.
But
Because we're one of the ones that got to live.
that's
But the
right.
question that's asked is, what does it mean for us today then, as those who care about justice in our world? What does that mean for us to lose our saltiness? Because salt is a preservation, right? We're talking about systems
Yeah.
running out. We're talking about
Yeah.
unsustainable systems collapsing.
Yeah.
And salt is used to preserve and to change things.
Yeah. And I think there's something right there when he says, "Be at peace with one another." I think that's a little bit of a hint at something. I think there's something about it. There should be. You should be the opposite of destroying and devouring one another. There should be bringing the peace to one another. And what are you seeing with that?
I think there's so many applications of what it means for us to become, for our work to become as worthless as gravel.
Hmm.
It's when Christians become so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good, when
Hmm.
they're so dedicated to saving souls that they forget about suffering bodies.
Hmm.
I got a phone call this week from someone who just had to know how it is that we as a ministry could be so affirming of the LGBTQ community.
Hmm.
And it was impossible for me to convince them to look at things from any other. They were just so set in the way that they
Hmm.
already viewed the discussion. Their mind was
Hmm.
already made up. It was so hard for me to try to get them to even consider a different perspective. And as I think of the LGBT folks in my life, dear friends that I love with all my heart, and are some of the most precious Christians I've ever met, better Christians than I am. And the way that those words would have hurt them.
Right.
You're no longer salt in the
Yeah, you're
way that
throwing
would
rocks.
preserve and
You're
heal. You're
you're
just a bag
literally.
of rocks, and you're
Yeah.
throwing those rocks. You're
Yeah.
just a bag of rocks, and you're throwing those rocks at people instead now.
Yep.
You're just
Yep.
harming people.
Yeah.
It's when we fail to take care of the vulnerable, whether it's immigrant, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's
Yeah.
women, whether it's people of a different race and culture, whatever, for whatever reason in this context, someone is most vulnerable to harm. It's when we fail to take care of them and we're part of the actual harm rather than the protection. Those are my thoughts. Could be just COVID brain.
Well, you got a darn good COVID brain, man. If my regular brain could be like your COVID brain,
That's not true.
I'd
You're
be
firing
happy.
all cylinders tonight too, Todd, even with lack of sleep. That's
Thanks, man.
no, really.
Oh, and this is really, and I know that
It was
our
your
audience.
comments last week that led me on all these rabbit holes this week.
Thank you. And this is the part of the show that our audience always likes, is when we're self-congratulatory towards each other.
I like you, Todd.
This is where you are
You're
such
one
a
of my
great
favorite
man.
people, Todd.
Herb, you're fantastic. You're like salt to me.
Yeah, like salt in a wound. Like lemon juice in a paper cut.
I feel assaulted.
You got anything else left to share this week, Todd?
Mercifully, no. Please share with us what you would like about Renewed Heart Ministries.
Sure. RenewedHeartMinistries.com. Renewed Heart Ministries is the ministry that sponsors or supports this show. You can check us out at RenewedHeartMinistries.com. Renewed Heart Ministries is a ministry that is dedicated to helping people discover the intersection of their faith and social justice engagement and all the various different ways that you can do that, different areas of justice that are so desperately needed today. RenewedHeartMinistries.com. All those resources are there. They're for free. You can also access my book from there. It'll take you to Amazon. That part's not free because I have a publisher who, if you need a free book, call me. I'll figure it out.
Oh, Herb, come on. A man is worth his wage. Come on, man. You put a lot of effort into that book. You should make a penny or two off the book. Come on now.
But I appreciate it. I don't.
Come on.
Anybody who's an author knows you don't make much money off of books unless you sell millions of them.
I know. But it's okay for people to pay for your book.
All right. So Finding Jesus, a fundamentalist preacher, discovers the socio-political and economic teachings of the Gospels. It's available on Amazon, in Kindle, on Audible as an audiobook. You can find all that there. But let me just say, too, I want to say thank you to all of those who out there are already supporting Renewed Heart Ministries' work. We are a shoestring ministry that tries to do a lot with very little. And so I just want to thank each one of you who right now you are supporting Renewed Heart Ministries' work. And if any of you listening to this would like to join them in supporting that work, you can do so by going to renewedheartministries.com and clicking donate. And that's what I have this week. That's it.
All right. As always, we really do love spending time with you all. And we hope that but before I say I hope, I'm grateful to know that in our little community that we have here, that we get to share this love and this heart for seeing God's justice done in the world. And it's a privilege to spend this time with you and to know there's other kindred spirits out there. And so thanks for being with us. We really do appreciate that. And I hope that you find renewed strength and courage for your journey, for what you do, and keep up the good fight. It's worth it. May you be salt in this world, as Christ calls us to be.
Thank you, Todd.
Have a good week.
Thanks, everyone, for watching.